Dad's 60th birthday party was held at the country club, complete with golf buddies, business associates, and the kind of networking conversations that made my family feel important. At 30, I was the artistic disappointment who couldn't hold a proper conversation about quarterly earnings or stock portfolios. "Here's our little artist," Dad announced as I joined the group around his table. Still playing with paints and pretending it's a career. My brother Marcus laughed from across the table, straightening his tie with the confidence of someone who'd just made partner at his law firm. "Some people never grow up, Dad. Still finger painting at 30 while the rest of us have real jobs." The assembled guests chuckled politely. Marcus had always been the golden child: Harvard Law, prestigious firm, penthouse apartment, and a wife who looked perfect in holiday cards. I was the eccentric sister who'd chosen art over law school, much to my family's enduring disappointment. "At least she's happy," Mom said with forced cheerfulness, the same tone she used when explaining away embarrassing relatives. "Not everyone can be practical like Marcus. Some people need to follow their dreams even when they don't work out." Uncle Richard, Dad's business partner, nodded sympathetically. "What exactly do you do with art, anyway? Teach kids? Work at a gallery?" "I'm an independent curator and acquisitions specialist," I said quietly. "I help private collectors and institutions acquire significant pieces." Marcus rolled his eyes. "That's a fancy way of saying she helps rich people buy paintings. It's not exactly brain surgery, folks." The table erupted in knowing laughter. I sat there picking at my salmon while my family explained my failures to Dad's friends. They had no idea that my hobby had quietly become one of the most respected acquisition practices in the country, with clients spanning tech billionaires, European royalty, and major museums worldwide. "The art world is so unpredictable," Dad's golf partner Bob said. "No steady income, no benefits. How do you plan for retirement? What happens when you get old and can't paint anymore?" "She doesn't paint," Marcus corrected with amusement. "She just looks at other people's paintings and tells them what to buy. It's like being a personal shopper but for artwork." The condescension was thick enough to cut. My family had spent years treating my expertise in art history, authentication, and market analysis as an extended hobby rather than serious professional skill. They didn't know about the doctoral thesis I'd written on Renaissance provenance, or that my authentication work had helped recover stolen masterpieces worth hundreds of millions. "Still living in that tiny studio apartment?" Marcus asked with mock concern. "Dad and I were talking, we could help you get into something more practical. Real estate maybe. Or you could come work at the firm as a paralegal." I took a sip of wine and stayed quiet. My tiny studio apartment was actually a converted warehouse in Chelsea that I'd purchased outright last year. But explaining that would require explaining how I'd made enough money to buy it, and my family wasn't ready for that conversation. "The problem with artistic types," Uncle Richard declared, "is they think the world owes them a living for their creativity. In business you produce results or you starve. Maybe that's what she needs, a taste of real-world consequences." Dad nodded approvingly. Exactly why I wanted both kids to go into law. Stable, respectable, profitable. Marcus understood that. He's building something lasting. Marcus preened under the praise. "It's about contributing to society, not just indulging personal interests. The law serves people, protects businesses, creates order. Art is decorative." The guests murmured agreement while I thought about the authentication work I'd done last month, confirming that a painting in a small-town museum was actually a lost Caravaggio worth $50 million. The discovery had made international headlines, but my family had missed it entirely. "What's your biggest sale?" Bob asked with the tone of someone humoring a child. "I mean, what's the most expensive painting you've helped someone buy?" Marcus leaned forward with interest. "Yes, sis. What's your personal record? A few thousand? Maybe 10 grand if you were really lucky?" I felt my phone buzzing in my purse but ignored it. Drawing attention to my phone would only reinforce their perception that I was antisocial and obsessed with technology. "Come on," Marcus pressed. "Don't be modest. Tell us about your greatest artistic achievement." The table was watching me expectantly, their expressions mixing amusement with pity. To them I was the family oddball whose childish pursuits had somehow stretched into adulthood. "The thing about art," Dad explained to his friends, "is that it's not a meritocracy like business. Success depends on luck, connections, trends. There's no clear path to advancement like in real professions. Exactly, Marcus agreed. It's all subjective. In law, you either win cases or you don't. In business, you either make profit or you lose money. But art? Who's to say what's good or valuable? I watched this analysis of my life's work while thinking about the Picasso authentication I'd completed last week. 3 major auction houses had been stumped by questions about the piece's provenance, but my research had traced its ownership back to the artist's studio. The painting would sell for over $80 million at next month's auction. The important thing, Mom said charitably, is that she's found something she enjoys, even if it's not financially viable. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real business success. My phone kept buzzing insistently. Then another phone at the table started ringing. Bob frowned and pulled out his device. "Sorry, work call," he said, stepping away from the table. But my phone was now ringing out loud, the sound cutting through the conversation. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't expected. "Are you going to answer that?" Marcus asked with annoyance. "We're trying to have a civilized dinner conversation." I reluctantly picked up. "Hello. Ms. Winters." The voice was cultured with a slight French accent. "This is Dr. Isabelle Dubois, Director of Acquisitions at the Louvre. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The table fell silent. Every conversation stopped as the word Louvre echoed across our corner of the country club. "The Louvre," I said, putting the call on speaker without thinking. "Yes, I'm calling about the Monet acquisition you facilitated for us last month. The authentication work was extraordinary and we have an urgent request. The museum board has approved a special exhibition featuring pieces you've authenticated over the past 5 years." Dad's fork was frozen halfway to his mouth. Marcus had gone completely pale. "We're calling it Hidden Masterpieces. The Winters Collection," Dr. Dubois continued enthusiastically. 12 major works that you've discovered and authenticated, including the Van Gogh that was missing for 60 years and the Degas we thought was destroyed in the war. Uncle Richard was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Did she say the Louvre?" "The exhibition opens next month," Dr. Dubois explained. "We're hoping you'll attend the gala opening. President Macron will be there along with collectors and museum directors from around the world. Your work has revolutionized how we approach authentication and provenance research." I looked around the table at my family's stunned expressions. 5 minutes ago they were explaining my career failures. Now they were listening to the Louvre's acquisitions director praise my professional achievements. "I'd be honored to attend," I said calmly. "Wonderful. Oh, and congratulations on the Times article about your recent Rothko discovery. The art detective who finds lost masterpieces. What a lovely headline. Though I suppose you're used to that kind of recognition by now." Marcus was frantically Googling on his phone, his face growing more shocked with each search result. "We'll send the formal invitation to your gallery," Dr. Dubois said. "The one in Chelsea, correct? Such a beautiful space for your private collection." "That would be perfect," I confirmed. After I hung up, the table remained in complete silence. 20 seconds of quiet while my family processed what they'd just heard. "The Louvre," Dad said slowly. "The actual Louvre. In Paris." Mom was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Honey, what exactly do you do?" Marcus held up his phone, his voice barely a whisper. "There are articles about you everywhere. New York Times, Art News, Smithsonian Magazine. They're calling you the most important art authentication expert of your generation." Bob returned to the table just as Uncle Richard was reading from his phone. "Elena Winters, whose groundbreaking research has recovered over $2 billion worth of lost artwork." $2 billion. Bob sat down heavily. "With a B." I nodded. Authentication and recovery. When paintings go missing for decades, or when their provenance is questioned, museums and collectors hire me to trace their history. Dad set down his wine glass with shaking hands. "Elena, why didn't you tell us? When would I have told you?" I asked quietly. "Between the lectures about getting a real job? During the explanations about how art isn't a serious career? While you were telling everyone I was finger painting at 30? Marcus was still scrolling through articles. "It says here you have a PhD from Oxford in art history and authentication. When did you? We thought you just had a bachelor's degree." You never asked about my education after I chose art over law school, I said. You assumed failure and stopped paying attention. Mom's hand was pressed to her chest. But you live so simply. That little apartment, the old car. I live the way I choose to live, I said. Material displays don't interest me. The work itself is what matters. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. Elena, we had no idea. If we'd known you were so accomplished, you'd have treated me differently? I shook my head. That's exactly why I didn't correct your assumptions. I wanted to know how you really felt about my choices. The country club's evening crowd was starting to notice the commotion at our table. Word was spreading that someone had just received a call from the Louvre, and curious glances were coming our way. We're family, Marcus tried, his earlier smugness completely gone. We love you. We just didn't understand the scope of your work. You didn't want to understand, I said, standing up from the table. You decided art was frivolous, so everything I did became frivolous by extension. I picked up my purse and headed for the exit. Enjoy the rest of Dad's party. I have some international calls to return. Where are you going? Dad called after me. Back to my finger painting, I said. I have a lost Picasso to authenticate before the exhibition opens. As I walked through the country club lobby, I could hear urgent whispers starting behind me. By tomorrow, Dad's business associates would know about the Louvre exhibition. By next week, the entire country club would be talking about the art expert they'd been dismissing for years. But I was done seeking their approval. I'd built something extraordinary while they complained about my choices, and I'd done it without their support or understanding. 3 months later, the Louvre exhibition opened to international acclaim. The Times called it a masterclass in art detective work, and the discovery of the missing Van Gogh made headlines worldwide. At the opening gala, surrounded by museum directors, collectors, and art historians who respected my work, I felt more at home than I ever had at family dinners. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones other people can't see the worth of, until the whole world is watching.